Hello and welcome to the first meeting of the Executive Management Committee. I'd like to welcome Vice Chair Say, also Council Members Cordero, Council Member Wire, and welcoming Council Member Dos Santos Tam also to the hearing. Council Member Kiaina is excused. Before we start our meeting, I have some procedural announcements to make. Pursuant to Section 92-3.7 Hawaii Revised Statutes, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony on all items on the agenda when the item is taken up in the following order. I will do a hybrid, calling both people who are in the council chamber as well as remote testimony. But before testifying, each person shall state their name. Each speaker may not have anyone else read their statement and is limited to a 1-minute presentation on each item. For remote testifiers, when your name is called, please monitor your screen and activate your audio feed when prompted. For those who are joining us by telephone only, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. Some friendly reminders and tips. Video conference from a quiet location if possible. If you're also watching the proceeding on Olelo, please mute your television at the time you are called to testify. When the timer goes off on the screen, please conclude your remarks promptly. HRS Section 92-3.7 requires all votes at remote meetings to be conducted by a roll call unless unanimous. Therefore, if there are any objections as noted, I will call for a roll call vote. For those council members participating from outside of the council chambers in accordance with HRS Section 92-3.7, the meeting will automatically recess if we lose audiovisual contact with you and cannot reconvene until we reestablish contact. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and telephone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones for the duration of the meeting. For action, agenda item number 1, Resolution 23-207, proposing an amendment to Chapter 21, Revised Ordinances of Honolulu 2021, relating to the Waikiki Special District. Members, please note that we posted to the agenda proposed CD1 to the resolution. For your information, the summary of the amendments is listed on the agenda. Before we proceed to testimony, members, I just want to make a brief introduction. The overreaching purpose of the proposed amendment is to implement regulatory measures that will ensure structural integrity and safety of shoreline hotels in the Waikiki Special District. Considering an acknowledged threat of sea level rise and its potential impacts, this initiative, if adopted later in the bill form, would require hotels located on a shoreline lot to have a structural inspection performed within 3 years of the bill's adoption, and then every 4 years thereafter. The proposed legislation seeks to proactively manage risks related to coastal erosion and flooding, ensuring both the public and private entities are prepared and have adaptive strategies in place to manage sea level rise incremental effects. The structural inspections aim to safeguard visitors, residents, and workers in Waikiki from potential sea level rise threats while identifying and describing any items requiring further inspection. We need these hotel owners to come to the table and have a conversation regarding the threat of sea level rise to Waikiki. Sea level rise isn't a distant threat. It's happening now, and we must take tangible steps to ensure that potentially impacted areas like Waikiki remain safe and thriving. I urge stakeholders to recognize the magnitude of this challenge and join us in formulating and executing sustainable solutions. This resolution aims to start the conversation in creating an action plan to protect our communities and vital environmental and economic resources from sea level rise. Okay, members, I'd like to start now with Dana Bergman. I believe Mr. Bergman is joining us via teleconference. There he is. Hello, Mr. Bergman.
Aloha.
Please proceed.
Yes, I'm Dana Bergman. Thank you for affording me a little bit of time to speak today. I apologize for not being there in person. Unfortunately, my son came down with COVID this morning, so I, out of a precaution, decided to do this by Zoom. So I apologize for not being there in person. I wanted to speak in support of this resolution. I am a construction consultant and a construction management advisor, and I have spent the bulk of my career working on existing structures, in particular high-rise buildings in Honolulu. And I think that the notion behind Resolution 23207 is really sound. The thing I would differentiate between, I would say, though, is that there's really two things that the resolution touches on. One is things that are oriented around sea level rise, and the other is oriented around deferred maintenance or lack of maintenance on buildings. And what happened in Florida touches on that issue. So if you will refer to my written statement, you'll see I gave you some examples of other legislation around the country, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, ultimately, you agree with me that it's important to ensure that our buildings are structurally sound, right?
I do.
In your line of work, do you currently conduct inspections of buildings?
We do. We work alongside a variety of different disciplines, depending on what each building's needs may be: structural engineers, architects, geotechnical engineers. So all of these buildings, all of these aging structures have needs. And as the buildings age, they have greater and greater needs. I always equate it to healthcare like people. And, these buildings, as they age, require more and more maintenance. If some of these things go unchecked, they turn into severe problems. And the resolution touches on what happened in Florida. And if you go look at, what the experts that worked on that are saying, that it may or may not be related to sea level rise, as this resolution states, but more really oriented around deferred maintenance.
Okay, and deferred maintenance meaning that if you don't take care of the corrosion in a timely manner, it could result in catastrophic damage. Is that correct?
Correct. So, again, we would need to get a structural engineer to do specific analysis on a building by building basis. But as a generality, concrete problems, concrete spalling, the corrosion of reinforcing steel inside the concrete is a derivative of age and exposure, usually driven by water. And as those reinforcing bars corrode, you get concrete spalling, and eventually you can get significant structural problems. That's true of slabs, columns, pool decks, all of the above.
You mentioned that corrosion could be exacerbated by water. Can you expound a little bit more about that?
Sure. So corrosion is often exacerbated or accelerated by exposure to water and chlorides. Chlorides, of course, are prevalent in our salty environment. And so when you have, hot, wet, salty air and concrete and steel buildings, you can often get corrosion and accelerated corrosion.
Okay, and what exactly happens when there's water inundation or corrosion and salt water? And you said salt vapor as well, saltwater vapor?
Well, you have to differentiate. It gets very technical, Councilmember Waters, but as a generality, you talk about inundation, that is liquid water, where you may have a structure that is being inundated by sea level rise. That is one concept that's in the resolution. The other concept that's in the resolution is more oriented along deferred maintenance or lack of maintenance. So in an older concrete structure, concrete cracks by nature, right? So as it cracks and ages, it's less able to protect the reinforcing steel inside the concrete. And so when that happens, you can get corrosion. The steel itself actually expands as it corrodes, the reinforcing steel inside concrete. And then as it expands, the concrete itself will spall. And what starts, it's almost like cancer. It starts very small and it can spread. So the faster it is treated, the less expensive it is to repair, and the less safety problems that a particular building may be exposed to.
Okay, so with proper maintenance, this problem can be solved or at least slowed down. Is that correct?
Yeah, a concrete building, much as, most of our buildings are concrete and concrete products. They are going to be affected by corrosion and concrete spalling, probably in perpetuity. The key is if you take care of the buildings and you are compelled to take care of the buildings, you will have fewer problems, and the problems when you do have them often are lesser. So that's really more oriented around the notion of this deferred maintenance or lack of maintenance. The sea level rise portion of it is different. So when you talk about inundation, that's where you need to talk to other types of experts that deal with that kind of thing, where you have water that's inundating a building. Separate and apart from that, what we do see is we see things like water starting to come into the lower levels of buildings because of water pressure. So as the water table comes up, for example, you can get pressure that builds, and you can get literally I've seen little fountains in the cracks and slabs in the bottoms of buildings in Waikiki where the water pressure is great enough that you now have water coming in through the cracks. That's that could potentially be more associated with the sea level rise issue. So I just want to make sure you understand you're really dealing with two separate concepts in one resolution.
Okay, thank you for that. Lastly, buildings typically are built with columns that go deep into the earth. How do you inspect the columns that are pounded into the ground? When you can't see it, it's covered by earth.
I don't have a good answer for that. I would defer you to a geotechnical specialist or to someone that specializes in piles or other structural elements that are pounded into the ground.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, do you have any follow-up questions for Mr. Bergman? Councilmember Cordero.
Hi, Mr. Bergman. I was just wondering, you mentioned that you worked with different structures, and so if there are different buildings or properties that want to, I guess, alleviate and work with new types of structures or properties, what type of properties would help reduce the, I guess, water from going into such structures, from versus concrete versus another type of structure?
So if I understand your question correctly, the question is, what kind of materials or what kind of things could we build with that would keep the water from going into the structures, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so whether it's a concrete building or something else is not necessarily the issue. The concrete and the steel are structural elements. What keeps the water out of the lower levels of the building is waterproofing. And the absolute best way to deal with that is at time of new construction, because you can put the waterproofing on the positive side of the wall or the outside of the wall. And there are very robust waterproofing solutions that are available that are extraordinarily long lasting. When you start dealing with older buildings where that original material has failed, or there is inadequate material, now you're looking at other solutions that you may have to implement in order to keep the building dry. And those repair solutions are incredibly costly as compared to doing it at time of new construction. The challenge we have with not just here in Honolulu or in Hawaii, but really anywhere that is having issues with sea level rise or with water infiltration into a building is that whether it's here or anywhere else, we have to come up with a means of being able to do it, plan for it, and budget for it. And I think that's kind of what this resolution is intended to convey.
Absolutely, thank you. And I know that this is specific to a particular area, but of course in my area, I also have Mapunapuna, which is inundated with king tides almost every single month and week. So I just wanted to bring that up as to why I'm very interested in this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Bergman? Seeing none, I did have one last question. In your written testimony, I'd like everybody at home watching to hear this, because I'm not sure everybody's going to read your written testimony from home. But you note that 3 other jurisdictions have passed similar legislation, or at least 2 have passed and 1 is considering it. Can you just expound upon that for a minute?
Sure, I'm happy to, Councilmember Waters. So what I did in my written testimony was really intending to give you folks as council members just some examples of what other municipalities or states have done. And in my letter to you folks, I listed kind of 3 examples that exist of some of these building and structural inspection laws that other cities or other states have put in place. So one example is New York Local Law 11, which is more focused on the facade of the building and keeping the facade structurally sound so that things don't fall from the structure and present a safety hazard. That's one example. Another example I gave in my testimony to you folks is a more recent law. The state of California recently passed Senate Bill 326, SB 326, and that is a statewide law that requires virtually every AOAO property, and of course in California they don't call them AOAOs, but it requires virtually every multifamily property in the state of California to inspect their lanais. And that came out of a tragedy where a lanai fell off a building and some people lost their life. And then the final example is amendments and modifications to the existing laws that were in place in Florida in the aftermath of what happened over there.
Speaking of lanais, wasn't there a tragic accident that happened here in Hawaii where a lanai structurally failed and people were seriously injured?
Yes, I mean, I don't know what specific examples, I can't think of a specific example, I should say, but I do recall that there have been incidences in the past, you hear about it in the paper, where a railing will give way due to a corrosion problem or concrete spalling, or like to your point, a lanai perhaps could fall off a building. That does happen here. It doesn't get a lot of press, but it does happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Any follow-up questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergman.
Mahalo.
Next, I'd like to call Dr. Chip Fletcher, who I believe is in person. Welcome, Dr. Fletcher. Please proceed. You can push the button. There you go.
Thank you, Chair Waters and council members. My name is Chip Fletcher. I'm a geologist at University of Hawaii. I research the problem of sea level rise. And I have submitted testimony in favor of this resolution. I'm also testifying as a proxy for Dr. Shelley Habel, who also submitted testimony in favor of this resolution. I just want to point out a couple of fundamental things that we know about sea level rise. It is an accelerating problem that is not going to go away from a human point of view. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, International Assessment Report on Climate Change tells us that sea level rise is going to continue for over 1,000 years. So we need to adjust our communities to all of the hundreds of different aspects of sea level rise that will affect our infrastructure and other aspects of how we conduct ourselves socially and economically. One of them is the problem of our groundwater becomes more salty as sea level rises. In fact, the water table under Waikiki actually goes up and down with the tides because it is directly connected to the ocean. And that salt water in the ground is flooding into the basements of buildings all across Waikiki, even as we speak, with every high tide. It's a very common problem, and it threatens the integrity of the foundations of these buildings. And I'll wind it up with that and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
What is exactly groundwater inundation?
So groundwater inundation is when the water table rises to the land surface, creating a wetland. And the water table under Waikiki and underneath most of the primary urban core of Honolulu is only a few feet below that land surface. It rises at high tide and it goes down at low tide. And with every increment of sea level rise, it gets closer and closer to becoming a wetland in our urban area. It's one reason already why we have major problems maintaining our roads, because the bottoms of the roads are getting sapped by that water table. It's a major reason why our buried infrastructure flexes with the tides. Our buried wastewater pipes and our freshwater pipes are all flexing as the tides rise and fall in the water table under the ground surface, breaking joints, changing the stress dynamics of our buried infrastructure. And now we know that that salt water floods the basements of most of our large buildings in Waikiki and elsewhere, and threatens the integrity of the rebar and the concrete that hold up those buildings.
So it's not just happening in Waikiki, it's actually happening island-wide, if not statewide. And it's affecting not just the hotels, but it's affecting other buildings. And as you mentioned, our roads and other infrastructure.
That's correct. It's happening all over the world. And the previous testimony should be interpreted as it's not just waves washing over or salty air blowing in, it's also the water table is salty, meaning that it's below where we can see very easily. And that's why increased maintenance and taking and establishing extraordinary measures for increased maintenance is critically important. This is a subtle problem that is beyond our vision in many cases. And so we have to look for clues and proxies that represent the danger inherent in this corrosion and flooding from the groundwater table.
So I want to just repeat that one more time, that it's not just the waters or the waves hitting the shoreline or the air with the salt water hitting the buildings, but it's actually coming from underneath the sand.
That's right.
Through into the structures, the buildings.
Nor is it a coastal erosion problem. This is water under every building in Waikiki, Kaka'ako, all the way to Iwalei and beyond. Water that is salty. We have measured this water. It is salty. And it's only at the highest tides of the year, it's less than a foot below the land surface. And it's coming up between, imagine from the H1 by the university all the way through Waikiki. That water table is going to come up and cause flooding. By mid-century, we're going to see it happening all over the place. And this particular resolution deals with the issue of that water being salty and corroding the foundations of our buildings.
Recently, there was a sinkhole in Kaka'ako, which arguably is within a half mile or so of the shoreline. Do you think that also could be possibly caused by groundwater inundation?
Very easily could be caused by groundwater movement up and down. The geology of the land under there is the same as the geology in Florida. It's an old reef and it's old beach sands. And everybody has seen the headlines in Florida of sinkholes taking dealerships and parking lots, and that's also a problem that we have here. And it's related to the water table fluxing up and down with the tides in the ocean and putting stresses on that geology, causing it to collapse in certain areas.
Okay, thank you. And as you mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again, and what does this mean to buildings?
It means that we have to go to extraordinary lengths to ensure the safety of the buildings. It's not our parents' buildings anymore. It's not our grandparents' buildings anymore. It's a new world. It's a new set of environmental hazards that are threatening the built infrastructure of our communities that we have established many safety standards for. Those standards were not established in light of the new problems related to sea level rise as well as other climate change issues. Everything needs to be examined again. Everything needs to be re-examined with human safety in mind.
You know, Waikiki, right next to the Sheraton Hotel, water is hitting a seawall. And when there's big waves, I surf out there, the waves hit that seawall with some force. That's not what we're talking about again, but that still must have an effect.
It does. When that wave hits the seawall or any element of the shoreline, it sends a pressure gradient, it sends a pressure wave through the water table. And that pressure wave will raise the water table in response to that. We have installed monitoring wells in Waikiki collecting data on the water table, and we see swell events. We see surfable waves recorded in the groundwater table going up and down. We see rain recorded in the water table going up. We see atmospheric pressure waves going by, recorded in the water table going up and down, and we certainly see the tides in the ocean recorded in the water table going up and down. It's doing it right below our feet here. The police station on, is it on King Street? They get flooding in their parking basement. Every day at high tide, they have flooding there. And that flooding comes up through the cement slab because it has cracked. The waterproofing has corroded away, the cement slab has cracked under the stresses, and salt water comes up into the parking area of the police station and nearly every large building in Waikiki that I'm aware of.
And the police station is at least a mile away from the shoreline.
That's right.
Okay. You know, I noticed outside of the Halekoa Hotel, the beach is starting to disappear. Outside of the White Outrigger Reef, I believe, there's no beach anymore. I used to sit there and paddle out to go surfing at Pops. That beach doesn't exist. Does that have an effect? The sand, the fact that we're losing sand, does that have a greater effect on how the seawater affects?
Certainly, anything that brings the ocean a few feet closer to where our buildings are, where our roads are, where our buried infrastructure is, anything that brings the ocean closer is going to accentuate, accelerate this groundwater phenomenon, as well as every other aspect of sea level rise, from annual wave flooding to storm surge flooding.
Do you think the beach restoration, which is one of the strategies that we're currently using, both working with the state and the city, beach restoration, is that going to help mitigate the corrosive effects of groundwater inundation?
I don't think it will help mitigate the corrosive effects. I think it will provide a relatively minor amount of buffering on this problem, but it's not going to mitigate the chemistry of the groundwater. That's a much bigger issue that is related to salt coming up from below as sea level rises and coming in from the shoreline area where it has access.
Okay, and as you mentioned, if it's happening at the police station over a mile away, whether or not we put more sand there isn't going to help the police station.
That's correct. Yeah, that's not going to help there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher. Members, any follow-up questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jerry Gibson, followed by Rick Agid, and then Kikoa McClellan. Hello, Mr. Gibson. Thank you so much for being here today.
Aloha. Great to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Waters and members of the Committee on Executive Management. My name is Jerry Gibson, President of the Hawaii Hotel Association. On behalf of HHA's members representing more than 30,000 hotel rooms in Hawaii, we submit the testimony in opposition to Resolution 23.207. Having worked with Hyatt, Hilton, and Marriott, there are annual management operational reviews that are extremely extensive as to building character, spalling, electrical, plumbing, roof, elevator, structure, sewerage, and more. These extensive audits are performed by professional outside companies. On top of that, all major hotels have professional staff on a year-round basis that inspect and perform purposeful preventative maintenance on the buildings and landscape. HHA believes the resolution is unnecessary insofar as hotels are already fully incentivized to keep these buildings safe. Moreover, the resolution would cause all hotels to incur substantial additional costs to pay for professional engineers or architects to evaluate hotel buildings, and additional red tape to complete required filings with the Department of Planning and Permitting. This additional regulation and costs will not actually improve the condition of hotel buildings, but only add to the regulatory burden on hotels. We therefore ask and encourage you not to advance the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gibson, and I appreciate you taking the time out to be here. I noticed in your written testimony saying, having worked with the Hyatt, Hilton, and the Marriott, but you're testifying on behalf of the Hawaii Hotel Alliance,
Yes,
right?
correct.
Okay, can you say with certainty that, let's talk about the Hyatt for an example, they do annual management operational reviews?
I can tell you for sure they do. There's really redundancy in what we do. because it's not only the flag, meaning the Hyatt or the Marriott flag or the Hilton flag, that is doing this, which they do. It is also the ownership groups, which they have their own architects, they have their own building departments, et cetera, and they also come and inspect. And then if you take the hotel I'm in right now, for instance, we have 65 people that all they do is plumbing, electrical, you know, inspecting the rooms, inspecting the landscape outside, everything else. So they're in the building every day. So it gets a thorough look, at least twice a year inspected, all these hotels are, and also on a daily basis by our teams.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. And again, in your testimony, you point out that there are annual management operational reviews that are extremely extensive as to building character, spalling, electrical, plumbing, roof, elevator structure, and sewage. I'd like to take a few minutes to just focus on spalling.
Sure.
What kind of inspections, and again, you mentioned that you worked with Hyatt, Hilton, Marriott, but if we can be more clear, like what are the annual inspections dealing with spalling?
Let me give you an example, a recent example. At the hotel I'm at right now, we did what was called a ping test. And they literally go through up and down, whatever areas you're concerned with, for instance. And they went around 1.5 of the 2 towers that we have. And a ping test is just a ballpoint hammer and then a bucket, and they're testing all the areas. They test from the lanais all the way down. And so if they find loose spalling, that is marked, photographed, et cetera. And what we decided after we did that ping test is we are going to do the spalling for the entire building. So we are doing that beginning November, and that literally goes up and down each section of the hotel and inspects the different areas. They photograph it, open it up. At some points, there's drilling if there's challenges there, and they drill to the rebar, clean the rebar, and then of course waterproof it again. And so it's a very arduous task. It's not fun to do. This task that I'm about to begin will start in November, and it will go 14 months to get around, you know, both of the towers. When I was at Hilton Hawaiian Village, we have 9 towers there. We did 8 of those towers. One of them is brand new, as most of you know. So that obviously didn't need it. But as I was there, you know, there was one, we did 1 at a time. And over the 11 years, we did 8. Terrific. So it's an ongoing project. Everybody's inspecting them. We just opened up Turtle Bay not too long ago. We went around the whole tower. And very expensive process, but it needs to be done. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, thank you for acknowledging that. I noticed that in yours as well as other industry testimony, you acknowledged that sea level rise and water inundation is in fact real, and that it has to be paid attention to. And if it's not paid attention to, then catastrophic things can happen. So the fact that I'm hearing you say that you are paying attention to that is heartwarming in a way, to know that you're taking the preventative measures. Now, when you spoke on behalf of the hotel that you're currently working on, do you have any other concrete examples of the other hotels that may be affected by this resolution and corresponding bill? That what kind of measures are they taking to ensure that those other hotels are doing the exact same thing that the hotel that you work for are doing?
I can tell you, I've been with the different companies. The hotel in back of me right now just completed, it was about a 9-month job of spalling. And it's an independent hotel with a franchise flag. on it. And so every single hotel that I know of does this process. Particularly the ownership groups want nothing wrong with the hotels. And they're they're coming in all the time. They do a complete inspection once a year. The flags do an MOR, management operational review, once a year. And our teams are there all the time. So it's happening ongoing. I dare say that I don't know a hotel that doesn't do that.
Glad to hear that. I mean, this resolution and corresponding bill really does come from a place of public safety and aloha, not only for the industry, but for the folks who stay in the hotels and work in the hotels. But a fact of the matter is, if one of the hotels were to go down, it would be catastrophic to our economy. It really would. People would not come to visit Hawaii if that were to happen. And the idea is just to make sure that the hotels are taking this seriously. One last question for you and everybody else who comes up to testify. You know, buildings are built with pylons. They pile on and push this big concrete pylons into the earth. And of course, based on what Dr. Fletcher testified to, you know, we're talking about inundation of groundwater. How do you inspect and or mitigate the groundwater hitting those pylons that are deep into the ground? And I imagine hotels near the ocean, those pylons are probably going really deep. How do you inspect and ensure that those pylons are not compromised by?
I've seen over the years that they do core testing. So I'm sure that's what they're doing. They're testing the pylons. I don't see that on an annual basis, to be totally honest with you, but I have seen it 2 or 3 times. So I think if they, thought something was amiss, or it was time to do it, or there was a problem in the area, I think that, that they'd be the first ones to do it. So.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your testimony. Members, do you have any follow-up questions? Councilmember Say.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson.
Good afternoon, Councilmember.
Yeah, just a couple questions. And the first question would be in regards to, with this resolution, can we not apply it to what you folks are already doing?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
The question is, can we apply this resolution to the process that you folks are already doing as far as inspections? Taking your template and putting it into a resolution form for all hotels in Waikiki.
I will tell you that we get complete reports on these MOR reviews. We can certainly answer any questions or anything like that. I'm not sure that we, maybe we could combine something like that and report out. That isn't, I don't think that would be overly difficult. I think we didn't want to add something that was expensive when it's already duplicative in our own right. We do it 3 different times, basically, in a year. So, but we have the information. All hotels have that. And so if that was something that was interesting, we could certainly get together and talk about that with the teams.
Okay, and the next question was simply put, would it be possible to have your structural engineers review the plans of maybe hotels that are 50 years and older meaning old, that could do those inspections of your concrete pilings because of the inundation of salt water, etc. How far deep does the inspection go? All the way to the bottom of the piling? What I'm trying to get at, as it corrodes from the bottom and works its way up, you may be inspecting maybe instead of a 100-foot tall piling, the first 50 foot from the ground level down, and the other 50 foot that is, also close to the bottom of the ocean or wherever you call it, that is not being inspected. Or how do you determine how far can you do the inspection? And the concern is basically if there is that spouting and corrosion. You're not going to see it on the first 50 foot from the surface to the project, and then the other 50 foot, which is hitting the coral, like what you're saying. I don't know, Mr. Gibson.
Yeah, you can, obviously the spalling that I'm talking about mostly is on the building, right? And that is the rebar. What I've seen two, 3 times is them coring, into the columns below. I've seen that only a couple times. So that is something, that maybe we need to further review and take a look at. A lot of the buildings in Waikiki are getting to that age already, and there's some that are over. But, it's something that, we can, as an association, we can take a look at and see if we can see who is testing that on what frequency.
Okay, and I think what the sponsor of the measure is trying to do is be much more preventive rather than reactionary later on. And,
Right.
and I personally feel, Chair, it's not going to be within my lifetime that you see a hotel collapse, but it may someday. So I would think for most of these private hotel operators, when you look at the Gold Coast, that's where I get concerned about, where that may be where the first incident occurs. And then in closing, Chair, I just have really major concerns about not the private sector, but the public sector. Right, Mr. Gibson, you would attest to the fact that every time we have a storm, it's the Kalakaua Avenue that has our stormwater backing up and our sewer system backing up. It's all part of the water inundation. So I bring this up because I thought maybe for us in the city would have addressed this particular issue in Waikiki with the public infrastructure funds that the federal government had appropriated to the states. But I don't think we got the resources from the state to the counties as far as looking at it. So I just bring this up because, I am concerned, I'm aware, and I did go to one of the presentations by Director Agid, and that was with Kuhio Avenue having elevated avenue with trenches on both sides to address the excess water. So I don't know what's going to happen.
I saw that model. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So, Chair, I'm happy you brought this issue up because it is something of concern. But I would say this, finally in closing, there must be technology throughout the world that can try to address the concerns that we all have. The sustainability of our private infrastructure that we have on Waikiki Beach. And I hope we can address it. Thank you.
No, thank you. And you brought up a good point. It's not just the hotels that we need to be concerned about. It's actually all of our infrastructure, as Councilmember Cordero pointed out, in what district? What? Mapunapuna on King Tides. The water is up to your door in some places. So good point. And how does that affect all of our infrastructure and our roads? And as Dr. Fletcher mentioned, our sewer as well and water transmission systems. But thank you again. I'm happy to hear that the hotel industry does acknowledge that this is occurring and that we do need to take necessary steps to protect the vital resource that we have. And I'm talking about tourism. We have to do everything we can to protect this because that's the major revenue generator, not for the city necessarily, but the hotels do pay high property taxes. I recognize that. And all the more we want to keep you guys safe because we need that revenue. But I thank you again.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Gibson. If I may take out of order Mr. Dean from the Outrigger Hotels. I believe he's on a time crunch. Sean D. Aloha, Mr. D. Thank you for joining us. Please proceed.
Aloha, Chair. Sorry, I was kept on mute there. I couldn't unmute myself.
No problem.
Again, mahalo to you and the members of the council. I'm Sean D. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the Outrigger Hospitality Group. Jeff Wagner, who many of you know, our CEO, would love to be here. Unfortunately, he's on the mainland, unable to attend. As you know, we submitted written testimony in opposition of Resolution 23-207. I'm obviously not going to go through all those notes. You have them. But to your point, sea level rise is clearly top of mind for all Hawaii beachfront properties, owners, and operators. And specific to Waikiki, we feel strongly that the adaptation and replenishment measures included in the current EIS that's been referenced a few times now would mitigate many of the issues that our properties are facing, both short and long term. In our humble opinion, Resolution 23-207 duplicates, as you heard from Mr. Gibson, existing practices for hotel owners and narrowly targets hotels in Waikiki. We're hopeful that in this moment, it can be used as a discussion of what can work now, specifically the community and industry-led efforts to restore Waikiki Beach, as this is crucial for a short and long-term shoreline and sea level rise adaptation plans. We're asking for support from the council for these ongoing efforts. Mahalo for your time.
I appreciate you, Mr. Dean. I did read your testimony, and it's wonderful to hear that you support Waikiki Beach replenishment and renourishment, third-party environmental certification and associations, and meaningful ESG initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, you know, I surf out at Pops, or I used to surf out at Pops when I was younger, and I think it's the Shorebird restaurant, and I believe that's Outrigger Reef. The sand is gone, and rebar is sticking out. I'm not sure if the rebar is from your hotel or is it from, you know, infrastructure leading up to the hotel. But is your hotel currently experiencing inundation from seawater?
Well, it's an interesting question. So the rebar that you're describing is actually the right-of-way. That's the public right-of-way. That's the easement. In fact, it's the ADA easement that's between the Halekulani and between the Outrigger Reef, right? So that's where that's coming from, the concrete there that's been kind of eroded and eaten away. That's why we feel pretty strongly about, again, continuing the plan. We had the three-phase plan, but potentially putting some emergency efforts in place to again, rebuild the sand. If you study Waikiki Beach as a man-made beach going back 100 years, and you look at photos from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, that beach, Gray's Beach, as you know well, you know, was probably 60 to 70 feet out. And you heard from Dr. Fletcher earlier that it's going to help. And that's something that we think we really need to focus on, you know, right now. And, you know, I heard from Jerry Gibson, my counterpart. I can only speak for what Outrigger. We have 2 properties on the beach. Obviously, we own and operate them ourselves. We've had massive renovation plans over the past number of years. And that renovation plan process requires what we call property condition reports, where we really investigate every inch of the property. And I think the thing that's changed also, and Jerry alluded to it, as well as the lenders, the ones that actually lend us the money to make these massive renovations and investments that drive the tax revenue that we need, they care as well. So we not only have our own set of eyes as an owner and operator and engineers looking at the condition of the properties, we have lenders on an annual basis also coming in. So there's a lot more rigor and scrutiny to this process than there has been historically.
I appreciate that. And I, for one, support the beach replenishment, not only in front of your hotel, but across Waikiki. I think we got Rick Agate here, who's also a big advocate, and I'm part of the Waikiki Business Improvement Association. And I do think it's a good idea, but you make a good point that people wouldn't be lending you money to renovate your hotel unless you're doing your due diligence. But if you can, just for a minute, share with us what type of mitigation projects. Is it waterproofing the columns or sealing up the cement or somehow taking care of the inundation? And perhaps other hotels can learn from what Outrigger is doing.
Yeah, again, it depends on the property, depends on the condition. You alluded to it. It depends on the age as well. So we've done a range of different work. Again, it starts typically with an assessment and audit of the property condition, especially for any major renovation. And major renovations in our business happen typically, and Jerry alluded to this, every 7 to 10 years. It's frequent. When I say major, $50 to $100 million type of renovations. And they start with an assessment of the structural integrity, you know, the foundation, the pilings, the basements, et cetera. And so that's just something that's a normal part of the process. So you assemble a team, architects, engineers, you know, typically these are experienced people in these conditions. You've got contractors, subcontractors, specific consultants that understand how the water table is working here. You've heard from obviously some other experts as well. You look at a range of options, you have pricing estimators that come in as well. But the number one focus I can assure you for everyone is infrastructure, right? The structural integrity is just critical, not just for the renovation itself, but the long-term structure, the long-term value of the asset. And that's the long play for us. So yes, these discussions are about what's going to happen in 30 or 40 years, but our intent is to ensure that these buildings last much longer than that.
I appreciate that very much, because when you think of hotel renovations, we think of retiling the bathrooms and getting new beds and painting the walls, but it's very good to hear that it also is dealing with the structural soundness of the building. So thank you again, Mr. D. Again, I really appreciate you being here. If I may, I'll just open it up to any of the other members have any questions. Councilmember Cordero.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Wagner. D, for being here. Sorry, I apologize. I was just wondering, relating to the duplicative matters of the resolution. I mean, I know that if Outrigger is already having this occur, these practices occur, would the resolution then be supporting the duplicative efforts that Outrigger is providing?
No, as I think you heard from for Jerry Gibson, that's worked with a lot of different brands, represents now the Hotel Alliance. From our perspective, remember that alliance with Jeff Wagner, obviously at the helm. From an Outrigger perspective, the things that we've identified in the resolution, and again, we think all well-intended, are things that we already have to do. You know, we have to do those, one, to protect our hosts, to protect our guests, to protect the place, especially for a company like Outrigger that's based here. These shoreline assets are the value of the company. And so this is something that we need to do, and we do on a constant basis. So we're just trying to remind you of some of the things that are already in place, whether it's a major renovation like we've just conducted at the Reef, or as you've heard on an ongoing annual basis, and whether that's driven by investors, driven by lenders, or just driven by just basic sound business practices. I can assure you it's happening from an Outrigger perspective.
Okay, thank you. And with this resolution, I support it mainly because I think if we see, if we not only know how Waikiki owners and property owners are leading, I'm hoping that it would be a good measure to show the rest of property owners along the coastal areas to also do such maintenance as well. You know, we all represent, all 9 council districts have some type of waterfront, even if it's like landlocked or not. And so I want to be able to make sure that through a resolution like this, that our major businesses and landowners are able to usher that forward. And it's great to hear that, but also with this resolution, it shows, I guess, the commitment also from the council side as well. So I just wanted to state that.
Yeah, no, look, I think we all appreciate and understand that. I guess I would humbly submit that the folks that you're targeting are already the ones that are spearheading this and leading this on behalf of the whole state. We have to, right? We're protecting the most valuable assets that we have. And I would humbly submit also that the thing that we seem to be overlooking is Waikiki Beach, and that is one of the most valuable, if not most valuable assets in the state, and it is deteriorating. And so we can do things, you can do things, we can't. You can do things to fix that today, and we believe there's a path to do that. Rick will talk about it a little bit later. I don't think there's a sense of urgency. And to your point, Tommy, you know, I can't take my daughters to surf in front of the Reef right now because they can't even walk a surfboard out there, right? And so we take it for granted, but we want people to stay in Waikiki Beach, not go to the North Shore, not go to the east side, to keep them here, those high-paying guests that pay the TAT, pay all the taxes. We have to make Waikiki Beach the world-class beach that it once was, and it's not today. And you can help us fix that. So that's my again, humble suggestion from the Outrigger chair.
Thank you. I appreciate those sentiments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all agree with you, Mr. D. Any follow-up questions? Seeing none. Thank you again, Mr. D. Appreciate you taking the time to be here. Next, we have Rick Agid, followed by Kikoa McClellan. Hello, Mr. Agid. Good to see you.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair Tsay, members of the committee. Appreciate your time this afternoon. I don't want to repeat a lot of the testimony that was done by the previous, and I was really happy that the Two of the hotel representatives were here in person, so you didn't have to hear it secondhand from me. But at the chair and I actually discussed this resolution earlier, and so at his request, I did talk to the other shoreline hotels that weren't represented here today and found them to give answers that are consistent with what you've heard. In other words, each of those properties are doing the same thing that you've heard about here today. So again, these are not small companies. These are major companies with major assets and are determined to protect those assets to the best of their abilities. And so the concern being that this resolution just adds another level of regulatory responsibility that is not necessary. And I really question whether the Department of Planning and Permitting even has the capacity to evaluate these reports once they're printed, and even whether this is the right place. I'm not a lawyer, but if this is the right place in the ordinance to place such a provision. I have a lot more I could tell you, but my time's up.
No, please proceed.
I think that the important thing is that we are working with the city. The Department of Planning and Permitting actually has a study that this council funded, which is going to go through the Waikiki Special District requirements, and with the idea of sea level rise and climate change in mind, suggest changes to that ordinance. That's probably the more appropriate approach, and we're working with DPP and their contractor on that effort. And also we've thanks to the instigation of our senator at the state legislature has appropriated funds for a resilience and sea level rise adaptation plan for Waikiki, which we have, the money was appropriated to the State Office of Planning. They have contracted with the University of Hawaii to conduct the study, and that is just in progress, and it's actually funded over a 3-year period. So we expect a very comprehensive plan that will address, in fact, Councilmember Say was referencing a precursor to that effort that was done by the UH School of Architecture. So the planning to address a lot of these issues that, Chair, I know you're very concerned about, and as well as the other council members, for Waikiki are in progress. I do think that it's important that this is obviously not just a Waikiki and not just a shoreline issue. It's something that affects communities all over the islands, and as has been pointed out in numerous discussion earlier, not just directly on the shoreline. Anything that is in any kind of proximity to the shoreline is impacted. And so it is important that as a community, and certainly we in Waikiki recognize what critical importance this has for us going forward. And so we are pleased to work with the city. We've been doing it. We'll continue to do so. And Chair, hopefully we can come up with a lot of ways to make this work well for the community going forward.
Thank you so much. Can you tell me what the name of that study is and who's funding it?
It's the city study.
You said, I think it was DLNR working with the city?
DPP.
DPP?
DPP is working, they have their own study, and I can't recall right off the top of my head, I can send it to you, Chair, the name of the study, but they know they've already let the contract out, and the study is in progress.
And when is the study?
The study is to look at the requirements of the Waikiki Special District and what changes need to be made in order to accommodate sea level rise and climate change.
Okay, so the study is already addressing sea level rise and climate change and
Yes.
the effects that they have. Okay. I'm just reading from your testimony that the Waikiki Business Special District Association is very aware of the challenges of beach erosion, sea level rise, and climate change in general, and what that means for Waikiki. Do you then agree with what Dr. Fletcher is talking about, how this could be very serious?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we work closely with Dr. Fletcher, and we use a lot of his work in our planning going forward. But the only place where I disagree with him would be the necessity of doing this additional inspection mandated by the legislation being proposed by this resolution.
Okay. Maybe at another time you can provide to me the names of the hotels that are in your association. Because I, as we heard from Mr. Gibson and Mr. D. That's two hotels.
And
I know you
they're
speak
both
for-
a member of our association as well. But yes, I can give you a list of our members,
Terrific. Thank you so much.
certainly.
Any follow-up questions, members? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, you had a question? Sorry, Councilmember
Yes.
Cordero.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Eggett. Thank you very much for being here. I was wondering, since you're already working with DPP, and I know that, are there, would the businesses be open to reporting back to DPP the reports and plans that that they already provide annually when they do their structural analysis and such, instead of having like a DPP employee go down to each property?
I think as Jerry Gibson mentioned earlier, it's something we could talk about in terms of doing some sort of report, you know, that without the necessities that are the kind of regulatory, mandatory inspections that are talked about in this resolution. I think there's probably something we can do, Jerry, in this area. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Jerry is the head of the Hotel Alliance, but he's also on my executive committee, so we work very closely together in Waikiki on all the various issues.
Okay, and I know that we're just looking for further assurance, and I know that some testimony says like adding more workload to DPP, but regardless of that, I think what I would be, I can't speak for other council members, but what I would be looking for is just further assurance, which is why I made that request. And I don't know what other type of assurance that we could have that wouldn't be a DPP employee going down there. So.
Well, I don't think the resolution would call for that, but it does look, the reports would have to be given to DPP, and then what happens to them after that, I think, in fact, I read DPP's comments on the bill, and they just basically said, we don't have the expertise to evaluate those reports. And so I think that although the concerns expressed in the resolution and we've been talking about today are very real, they're very much on top of mind, as Jerry said, on all of us in Waikiki. It's something we've been working on for years already, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Egan. Next, we have Kiko McClellan, followed by Angela Young, and then Dyson Chi. Aloha.
Aloha, Chair, members of the council. Thank you for having this hearing today. Really appreciate it. For the record, Keikoa McClellan. I represent the American Hotel and Lodging Association and the Hawaii Hotel Alliance today. If you will, Chair, I'd like to focus my brief comments on sort of why we're here today. And, you know, as a millennial, as ko Hawaii, someone who is, pili to the kai, there's no denying what's happening to the oceans, and sea level rise is real. We can't predict the next time a natural disaster will damage our industry and our state and our people, but we know that the sea level is rising. And I'm proud that the industry that I have the pleasure to work with is taking that seriously. Now, you heard others talk to the many specific things that we're already doing to deal with regular maintenance, to deal with a regular care of these important properties that house people, and those people include our employees, tens of thousands of them that call this place home, that we share this place together with, and their safety is critically important. But what I think might be helpful is if I kind of talk a little bit about what goes, Chair, may I continue? Thank you. If I talk a little bit about what goes into these properties, specifically in the Waikiki Special District. So just because I'm a geek, I wanted to know, like, in 5 minutes, how many of the properties that I get a chance to work with have undergone a significant renovation in the last 10 years. And I found 9 hotels, 9 different unique hotel properties, and I'll share this with you, Chair, for public record, that did at least $803 million in renovations in the last 5 years. Now, so what that entails when you are a nearshore property in Waikiki is that you trigger the revised ordinance of Honolulu, Section 23, which we commonly refer to as the shoreline rules, and Section 25, which deals with the SMA. It also triggers HRS 343, which is the IS, and the Waikiki Special District has its own design guidelines, which we updated in 2021, that speak to things like vertical accommodation, basement flooding and mitigation plans, and encourage things like the spalling abatement and other activities that you've heard about. This is the most rigorous county in the country to build anything. And that's because we care about what we put up and we care about where we put things. And so these properties within the Waikiki Special District that are singled out in this resolution have been and continue to be stellar actors in the space of maintaining safe, sound structures. One of the things that Mr. Bergman spoke about, and I'm a Kaneohe boy, so I don't like being compared to Florida or New York or California, but I'm okay with that on this issue because this is important, right? He did indicate that when you are dealing with the issue, it's okay. And I think that's really important, that when you look at the resolution that was presented to us today, we're pointing at the properties, in my honest opinion, that have probably spent the most amount of energy and money and resources ensuring the safety of those properties. It doesn't look at our nearshore residential properties that were the case in Florida. It wasn't a hotel, it was a condo. And it was because our federal investigators found that that condo was built incorrectly, that the cement was poured wrong, that the rebar in the pool wasn't to code, something that our properties are held to the fire on. We know that renovations done in Waikiki are done to the standard of care that this body and that the administration through the Department of Planning and Permitting spend tremendous energy on. And so I would point us also to Dr. Fletcher's testimony, which is important, and the Waikiki Special District Design Guidelines point to the sea level rise viewer that Dr. Fletcher and his team worked diligently on. But that doesn't stop at the Alawai and Kapahulu. And the Waikiki Special District does. It extends from Kapahulu on the Diamond Head side and the Alawai on the Ewa side. Sea level rise is not limited to Waikiki. But we do know that we can do things about it, and we've talked about those as well. And this council's continued support for things like the replenishment and renourishment of Waikiki Beach that are also congruent with our efforts to keep tourism in the Waikiki and other resort districts and off of our community beaches, are things that we think we can continue to work on together. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you or the body may have on what our membership continues to do to make sure that we provide safe spaces for our employees, for our guests, and for people like us who enjoy the Waikiki Special District.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Councilmember Cordero.
Hi, Mr. McClellan. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I was just
Councilmember.
wondering to you and the rest of who you, all the hotels that you represent, what would this resolution do for, what would it instruct those hotels to do?
Oh, that's a really good question, Councilmember Cordero. So, and you have hotels in your district too, right? Mapunapuna has hotels in Mapunapuna near the airport. So for the hotels that would be targeted by the Waikiki, in the Waikiki Special District through this particular resolution and appended bill, as written, it would mean we would have to do an extra assessment. And so now, what does that mean, right? Well, an assessment of this kind is not a, let's just call someone like Mr. Bergman in and no problem, right? And, no disrespect to Mr. Bergman, he made some great points, but, asking a building consultant if we should pass an ordinance to do more building consulting is kind of like asking the Honda dealer if you need a new car. The answer is yes, right? And it costs money, right? There is a cost, and that cost isn't just a few $100s. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars per property, per occurrence. And it's also time away from the projects. And you heard Mr. D talk about the frequency of churn in the industry. Hotel properties are redeveloped and renovated not every 20 or 30 years, but very frequently. I believe the Sheraton just completed a renovation, as did the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. they've done that twice in the last 10 years. And these are tens of millions of dollars at each occurrence. And so there's a lot of energy and effort that goes into that activity. And so to say that it is difficult is not an understatement. It is time, and it is a significant amount of money. We're talking about what could be an entire person's salary depending on the quality and nature of this additional assessment, and then working with DPP on what standards of care are there after we do this. There would need to be some instruction from the department on how we procure that consultant, whether we can or cannot use reports that we have, or if they're stale, who we turn them into, a process for dealing with that. So the concern here, council member, isn't that it's a bad idea. We think that maintaining our properties is an incredibly important idea, and we're doing it. The science behind the resolution, the concerns behind the resolution don't point to the fact that these properties that would be affected are doing a lot of really good work already and investing deeply in these assets for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions? Seeing none, thank you again.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, I believe we have Angela Melody Young, followed by Tyson Chi.
Give me 15 seconds, it's good. You can press record. Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, and the City Council. Angela Melody Young testifying in strong support. Or actually, I wish to comment. I neither support nor do I oppose this. So special improvement districts are special zones where it can have its own oversight. And this particular discussion is about environmental damage caused by nature and how to mitigate that. So it's not good to bypass this assessment process, and CARES as a grassroots advocate is standing in the gap to strengthen this process, and we advocate for more teamwork from the city and the state. Hawaii Revised Statute Section 205A-22 requires SMA minor and major. It legislates the SMA minor and major use permits. And in 2022, the state also tried to legislate authority to the counties because this work cannot be done without the state. So House Bill 1672, the purpose of this measure was to broaden the authority of the city to create special improvement districts by expanding the objective of the special improvement districts to include environmental research, restoration, maintenance, and natural resource management, natural hazard mitigation, climate change and sea level rise adaptation. The Committee on Finance heard this House bill, received testimony and support in this measure from DLNR, University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program, and Climate Resiliency Initiative, the Waikiki Beach Special Improvement District Association, and it got comments from HIEMA, the statewide emergency management team. So this issue is requiring of a lot of concern. So we advocate for this work, and just to show you the urgency, if HIEMA has to get involved, it is an agency to respond to natural and man-made emergencies. So it is indeed an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Tyson Chi. I believe that you're the last testifier.
There we go. We love technology. Aloha, Chair Waters, Vice Chair Say, and Councilmember Cordero. It's good to see everyone. My name is Dyson Chi. I'm 21 years old, and I'm a resident of Ala Moana. So part of the reason why I care a lot about this issue is because I live in Ala Moana. My house, if we hit, by the end of the century, basically my house is gonna be beachfront property, my grandparents' house is gonna be underwater, and Ala Moana and Waikiki, being right next to each other, we have a lot of similar interests. We have a lot of things in common. And so what happens in Waikiki really draws my attention because it could be a harbinger of things to come for my own community in Ala Moana. And because of that, it's good to know that there are some hotels here that really do care about this issue, that are doing their absolute best to make sure that there's not some sort of catastrophic damage due to sea level rise. The problem is that there are some hotels that maybe don't have this priority in mind. I know for one that the Sheraton Waikiki floods. they flood because sea level rise is drawing the water table up. And that's definitely causing structural damage. But for whatever reason, we're not allowed to take cameras in there. And clearly, if we can't take cameras in there, there's something that needs to be hidden or something that cannot be shared. And that's why I think that this resolution is so necessary, is because we need to ensure that every hotel is meeting an important standard that's going to prevent a serious disaster from happening. This is where we're really spending $1 today to save us from having to spend a fortune tomorrow. And this is critically important to me as a young person, as someone who will have to pay that fortune if something goes wrong tomorrow, who has to cry because people are dead tomorrow. I'm a part of the generation that inherits what we do today, and I think it's worth spending an ounce of prevention for a pound of cure. And there's nothing that I think can be traded for human lives, for the workers who are in those hotels, for the people who visit and live in those hotels, and for the people who are going to be inheriting those hotels. So I urge you to pass this resolution. Mahalo for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Chi? Councilmember Say.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Dyson. I see him at the Alamoana Kakako neighborhood board also. The interest that you have for public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Say.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Ms. Clerk, do we have any other registered or unregistered testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Okay, thank you. Members, that's it. We're in discussion. Any discussion?
Well, Chair, I'd like to say that I'm very happy that you did introduce this measure, and that I come to realize that most of our hotels are being responsible in trying to address sea level rise, plus also climate change. But more importantly, holistically, we've got to look at it from all sides. Because Waikiki is your particular council district, which is fine, but I have also brought up the issues at other committee hearings, Chair, about what's happening to our city and county and state infrastructure, public infrastructure. That you have the sewer system at Sand Island. The state has their airport close to the ocean, and our two utilities, that is Waiau and Kahe power plant. Those are going to be part of the infrastructure that will be affected. For me, this evening, I'm just happy that the private hotel owners are looking at it very seriously. But I did have one question for maybe Rick. Would you like to come up on behalf of the group also? The private hotel owners are doing an excellent job. Don't get me wrong, and it's based upon my premise that they are doing a great job in preserving and maintaining their private property, which is the improvements or the hotels. If we have something like this, would it, and some of these other hotels cannot fulfill this requirement as far as the inspections, et cetera?
Well, Councilman, Vice Chair Say, this resolution is very specific to the shoreline hotels in Waikiki. They're all major properties. There are no small ones.
Okay. It's just that I don't want to get caught in a situation, Chair, whereby I think in 2015 or 16, when the council passed the life evaluation that was dealing with, I wasn't here, but the life evaluation was, what's that? Fire sprinkler systems? How a lot of apartments and condos did not meet their requirement, and the insurance skyrocketed because they did not. For the private hotel industry, guys, I think you folks are very much way ahead of the game. But I would just be cautious to say that I would just be, Mr. Chair, love to see a annual report of just what the hotels have done every year or every 3 years, so that we get an understanding of the improvements that you are making. And I think that would be
I think, I'm sure we can discuss some way of bringing that about.
Thank you so much. Any further discussion? Councilmember Cordero.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for introducing this resolution. For me, the overall point is the assurance that we have for our coastal, the ones that are along the coast in the Waikiki Special District, but especially assurance for both the city and the city to have that information as well. I know that the request is for such structural inspections and whatnot, and since the hotels are doing that already, allowing for their own structural inspectors to be providing such information back to DPP would be good, but the request of the resolution overall is something I very much support, and so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, as I mentioned from the get-go, that the introduction of this resolution was to spur and begin a conversation and to talk about sea level rise and how it affects our community. And I thought Waikiki is a perfect place to start because your industry is so important to our economic survival, really. I mean, we look at what's happening in Lahaina. I'm really concerned about not only the people who live there and their housing, but also the economic effects of what happened. And in a sense, sea level rise is just like a wildfire, that this has catastrophic effects if we don't be proactive and try to mitigate the effects of it. And today I learned from those in the industry, and thank you so much for testifying, that you are taking steps to mitigate and that you are taking this seriously. Each one of you admit that, yes, we are aware that sea level rise is real. We acknowledge that, and we see it. You see it in your hotels. Now, we didn't get into the details of exactly how you're mitigating, which I hoped we would a little bit more, but the fact is that you acknowledge that it is happening, that you are taking this seriously, which I appreciate. And I just want to also end on with Chip Fletcher's testimony. Each year, Waikiki and Hawaii's coastal communities grow increasingly vulnerable to the dangers of groundwater intrusion, wave impacts, coastal erosion, high tide flooding, and storm surge, all of which are exacerbated by sea level rise. The National Association of Atmospheric Administration projects that Hawaii will experience 1.3 to 8 feet of sea level rise by the year 2100. Of course, it seems like a long way away, but you know, when you have young people like Dyson Chi here saying he's concerned about it and his kids concerned about it, and we should be concerned about it as well. I'm a little disappointed. I'd like to hear from the hotels like Kyoya, who has a number of hotels on the water, as well as perhaps the Halekulani and maybe even Halekoa Hotel. But I'm recommending that we postpone a hearing on this to be determined by the chair. And perhaps in the meantime, I can work with Rick, you, and Jerry to come up with some other solution. Again, the main thing is we want to know that the hotels are taking this seriously and doing what they need to do. So, Chair recommends that action on Resolution 23-207 be postponed to a time and date to be determined by the chair. Any discussion?
Chair.
Councilmember Cordero.
Of course, I would have liked to see this resolution go out, move forward. But with that, I know that since they are already working on their structural inspections and their plans and analyses, if we do postpone this, are we able to, I guess, would the hotels be open to such communications from the council to provide back to the council those questions that we did not get today, which is like how they are mitigating their structures? If they're open to that and then reporting to us in a manner, in a timely manner that we, I guess, instruct or prescribe in such communications to them.
Yeah, great idea. Based on the answers to those questions earlier, I believe they are willing to work with us. So take that into account. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Thank you. Am I required to take a vote on my recommendation to postpone? Not required? Okay, so ordered. Thank you, members. Thank you. We're adjourned.